Why do we have an inner critic? And how do we change it if it's ruining our lives? Welcome to another episode of It's Her Turn. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Dow. I'm glad to be here with you today. And this is actually one of my favorite topics just because I've had to deal with it and work on this myself personally so much. And I don't think there's one person that I've worked with in, man, over 35 years of doing counseling that hasn't had this issue on some level. So, what is the inner critic? The inner critic is a part of our, we could say, personality that comes into form when we're a little kid, right? When we're a baby and we're learning about life, we're learning about all the rules and how it works and who our parents are or our guardians and sort of the all the inner workings of how to become a person. And within that, we have the part of us that wants to thrive, that as a very small little person, we are going to be in a process of trying to feel safe, secure. We want to feel approved of, we want to feel loved. And with that, when we are raised in a culture, depending wherever you were on the planet, there were certain rules, certain conditions about what it meant to be a good girl. And we're going to focus on good girl because this podcast is primarily for women, but really you could just easily substitute being a good boy. And within that culture of that society and that family and that community that you grew up with, there was going to be certain rules about what was expected. And within that, those rules usually come with some conditioning from the larger context of what we would call the patriarchy, right? The rules, the bigger system that it's in. And that bigger system had has, over time created a lot of do's and don'ts as girls. We know that, right? We have the old good girl syndrome of girls growing up and wanting to feel good. And so that meant certain things that they learned from the cues and the actual words of their parents, specifically their mom, especially, right? Like be cute or be pleasing or, be funny or perform or don't say anything and just sit there and nod and smile and look nice. Whatever those conditioning messages were, we learn them. And then, depending on the family dynamics, they really inform our sense of self. Like we have a sense of self on some level, but in order to become that personality, that person we're here to be, right, we're going to be trying on new things and, seeing how far can we go before we, are getting in trouble or, what's okay, what's not. And within that, this informs our sense of the world. And if in our family there was dysfunction, addiction, abuse, mental health issues, unaddressed mental health issues, let's clarify, um, unaddressed past trauma that had never been addressed in our family, then those pieces are also informing our experience of who we are and how to be okay. And so let's take an example. If you have a parent who's in has substance abuse issues and you're a little kid, or you have a parent who's come from an abusive family in their childhood, um, they're going to have certain ways of behaving and wanting you to behave, probably similar to what they went through, where they're going to be really judgmental. They might even be um, totally unconscious, right? Not aware that they're constantly shaming you, putting you down, telling you you'll never make it, you're never going to amount to anything. And even if it's not verbal and it's more nonverbal, that messaging of expecting failure, sort of not giving you the reflection that you're a good person, that you're doing well, but instead constantly looking at what you're not doing well. and shaming and blaming and punishing you for it, then what happens is part of our personality says, well, gosh, we got to figure this stuff out, right? And so it starts becoming an inner version of that parent trying to catch you in that quote unquote bad behavior before you get in trouble. So, in other words, it becomes that perpetrator in your own head going, oh, you're screwing that up. You better, do that better. Oh, you're just not, trying hard enough. Oh, you're going to fail anyway. So, we end up with this internal version that is toxic and shaming and blaming and harmful. And its original intention was to sort of help us be okay. But of course, it becomes, like I said, like an inner perpetrator beating us up. And a lot of times we go through our lives not even realizing that we have this inner voice, this inner dialogue that's happening because we're so used to it that we literally don't hear it. We're so busy just going along through our day, sort of trying to survive, trying to make it, everything's okay. Um, Still living from that place of do better, do more, do it right so you're safe, so you're liked, so you're loved, right? And yet, internally, we have this inner chatter, what we could call that inner thinking mind, ego mind, inner critic that's in there constantly beating us up, constantly telling us we're not doing it right. And, and that makes it really a powerful thing to get past because if you're not even aware that you have that dialogue going on, then you can't really do anything about it. Then you're really still locked into what you've been raised to. Like, so let's look at the classic young girl. She's raised to be a good girl and to please people. So she grows up trying to be a good girl with everybody else, right? Trying to be loved, trying to be seen. So she pleases everyone and she goes out of her way and says yes to everything. And she's, flabbergasted when these people that she helps all the time are never returning the favor. They're never being very kind or gracious back. And it's very confusing. So then you try harder and you're like, well, let me please more because if you've been raised in a dysfunctional family, likely that for some people that role is very simple. That's a way of like trying to be okay, trying to feel safe as you become the mediator maybe in your family, or you become the confidant for the parent who's struggling the most, and then you try and protect them and you try and make everything okay for them, and so you grow up being sort of like a mini caretaker. How many of you relate to that? That certainly was me. So then do you pick healthy people? Are you drawn to healthy people? Probably not. You're drawn to the people who are a little critical of you, right? Because your own inner critic is in there being pretty harsh. But again, a lot of times people don't even realize they have it. So that's a big piece, is to step back and say, I'm going to start paying attention to what I'm telling myself, right? And again, we can get so focused out here. I just had somebody just the other day even saying like, "Oh wow, just, you even asking me to start listening to what I was saying. I couldn't believe how I was talking to myself." Like, and this person is a grown adult and they've probably been talking to themselves for all these years like this. And that was the case for me, when I started doing some work around this, primarily because even though I was in school with psychology, I was drawn to spiritual traditions and learning. And one of the systems I was learning was very much about noticing, right? Becoming mindful and aware. And this was in my 20s. So this was quite a while ago. And it really helped me because I started to notice my inner critic and how it hurt me, how it showed up and like shamed me a lot. And then it would create, this pattern would happen where I would feel bad about myself. Then I'd feel like depressed and like sort of feel sorry for myself. And then I go really deep into like this place of like, nobody cares. I'm never going to be good enough. That was like my inner dialogue and this pattern that I could fall into like that, like that. So, how do we change it? How do we change it is we start with noticing and starting paying attention to how do you talk to yourself? And again, this isn't really you. If we look at it from a spiritual perspective, it's a part of your thinking mind, that personality that grew up in this cultural conditioning. So that's a specific part of you. That's not all of who you are. That is a very defined um, part of you that comes from the culture. And again, if we recognize that being raised to be good little girls in a patriarchy was very much part of the propaganda, like stay in your place, be a follower, don't speak up too much, just be nice and pleasing and cute and pretty and be here when we want you, and take care of other people. Right. So if that's the message you got, then it's almost like we have to unlearn some of that. But first we got to notice how we've subscribed to it. And of course we have. If this is the reality you grew up with, you're going to subscribe to it because you don't have a choice. But once you become an adult, this is when we start to be able to step back and say, God, I'm a people pleaser all the time and I'm miserable and I'm unhappy. And you know what? I have no idea how to be nice to myself. I have no idea how to take care of and be kind to me. And I end up feeling really depressed and anxious about that. Well, yeah, there you go. So that's one step. How is it showing up for me, this cultural conditioning? What is my inner thinking that we call the inner critic? How is it showing up? How is it bugging me all day long? How is it making me feel bad about myself, right? Because I have this voice in my head. Now, when I say it's not all of us, it's because when we start to become aware that it's just this voice, that awareness is what we hear a lot about in spiritual wisdom traditions and the ideas of mindfulness. We become aware of the thinking mind and know that that's all that it is. It's the thinking mind, it's thoughts coming through. It's not all of who you are. It is not your whole essence or your whole soul of who you are. And as you begin to do this mindfulness, like, hey, I'm going to be aware and listen to my inner dialogue more and more and recognize what I'm telling myself, then that alone is starting to give us a bigger picture of who we can be without that. When we aren't talking angry and mean to ourselves, who is that? The part of us when we start to feel good about ourselves, when we start making better choices, that's a true part of us as well. And we could say that that's the awareness, what I call our witness consciousness, our observer self that connects us with this bigger infinite experience of who we are, not just this little thinking mind. So how we start to change it is noticing how you are talking to yourself, cultivating that mindful awareness of, oh, I'm going to be aware of this thinking mind and recognize that it may not actually be true. These are things I learned in the past. These are things I was told. They don't really fit for me now. They don't really serve me. They don't make me feel good about myself. So why am I doing it? Well, I could do it different. I could interrupt that pattern. I could start to notice right when I'm doing something and how that inner critic shows up and says, "Kate, you're not doing that good enough." And I could start to recognize that and be like, that's not really helpful for me because A, I don't think that's really even true. And B, I'm doing it just fine. And you're not being kind and supportive to me. So I don't see how you're really supporting me. And I'm not going to give you so much attention. So I talk about this in my book, Fear Less: The Art of Using Anxiety to Your Advantage. I share that in the queen chapter, working with being the queen of your mind, because that inner critic is such an important part of us to start being aware of. It's a big it's a like a foundational step of becoming more into that mindful consciousness of who else you are outside of that thinking mind, which is so much more. Please know that. And so, what's beautiful is that the more we become conscious of it, the more we can have a pause, the more we can be able to say, no thanks, not going down that road with you today, inner critic, and you make a different choice. You are energetically and emotionally and mentally creating some new patterns. You're making space to interrupt the old patterns. And you're more than anything, you're cultivating that awareness. And that awareness helps us become more and more connected and open to who are we really. If I, Kate, am not having to be a people pleaser in order to be okay, then who do I get to be? I get to be me. I get to start figuring out what I like, what want, how to take care of and please myself so that I can have my own approval. I can have my own sense of trusting my own, choices. I'm going to make better choices for me because now I'm operating from a different place of I matter. I'm valuable. I'm not just an accessory here to please everybody else. So you can see how this starts to little by little, holistically, mind, body, spirit, affect how we show up in our own selves, how we then show up in relationship to other people and to our experience of the day and the choices or responses we have for situations. It starts to change all of that because we're more present, we're more aware, and we're treating ourselves better because we're now not letting the inner critic just hijack us, and we don't believe this old stories of who we think we used to have to be. We start opening up and having space to say, is that true? And if it's not, or if I'm willing to question that and say, am I doing it bad? Do I deserve to feel shameful and bad about myself all the time? And I say, no, no, sweetheart. Actually, you know what? I'm doing my best and I'm doing pretty damn good over here. And I deserve to take care of myself. I deserve to feel good about myself. And more than ever, I get to start talking to myself more nicely. So, how you start to gather that awareness and then use it to make better choices, be discerning in your own mind about what you believe. And that helps us, we could say, change those old patterns, but also save energy to be able to make those new choices. So I talk about in the book about how we change it is sort of stalking our own inner critic, right? We want to shadow it. We want to learn about it and find out, well, where did it come from? And whose voice does it sound like? And when is it showing up the most and being really mean to me? And how am I going to interrupt that? How am I going to say, that's not okay anymore? And actually, I'm starting to take care of myself and believe in myself and approve of myself. So I don't need to keep doing all those old things I thought I needed to do to be okay and to be loved and to be seen. And we begin to become the awoken co-creators of our life, right? And that's what we're talking about on this podcast on It's Her Turn. How do we awaken as women to what we've been doing that isn't really working for us because it's from a system that wasn't really meant to work well for us, you know, and beliefs that don't work for us. And ways of being that don't really work for us in those old systems they did, but they no longer work because they're not really working for anyone. When women can't feel good about themselves, love themselves, appreciate themselves, feel good about themselves, say no to toxic shame, say no to abusive dynamics in our head or in relationship, this is what's going to change things. Let's just say that. This is what's going to change things. And so I invite you to start paying attention and listening to that inner dialogue and really get to know what that thinking mind, that conditioned mind is talking about, that inner critic, and start paying attention so that you can make a difference and start creating some pause and change in how you relate to it. So these days, my inner critic, it it hardly really shows up, and when it does, I don't really mind. I don't give it much attention. I'm just like, okay, whatever. I just don't buy into it anymore. And I will tell you, I was pretty crippled with self-loathing and internal judgment because I grew up in a family system that was full of that. My family, God love them, they did the best, but they had a lot of unaddressed trauma. And we had substance abuse addiction in the family. We had mental health issues. And it, even though it looked nice from the outside, from the inside, it was like a really bad inner critic shame fest, you know? It was just shame, 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 shame. And that's all that was ever really dished out because that's what they knew from their family. So I grew up really by the time I was in seventh grade, I remember absolutely feeling useless, worthless. I hated every bit of my body. I didn't think I was smart enough. I didn't think I was capable. When I was actually pulling A's, I was playing on all the sport teams. Um, I look back and just go, my God, honey, I'm so sorry you didn't get to feel good about yourself. Because I look back and I just want to hold her and cry because I felt so crappy about myself. And it's just sad and it's disturbing. And I struggled with a lot of mental health challenges um, because of it. Not just because of the inner critic, but that was one way it showed up. So to be in a different place and to know that Phew, that I don't have to live like that, I can tell you is it's just a blessing. It's a blessing to have a choice. And even when it does creep in, I have a choice now. And sometimes I can listen to it and start to feel bad. And then I go, really? Is this really the road you want to go down? Is that going to support you to feel better? Maybe you just need to go take a nap or take a walk or go talk to a friend. Like let's have our other things we can do instead of sitting here listening to our negative inner critic, who, again, like I said, is pretty disempowered compared to how it used to be. He's like been or he or she have been demoted, a number of slots on the power sector. It's like way less power. And that's really what we want. We want to just bring that part of us that has a lot of power because of how we've grown up and just slowly say, like, you can be helpful when you're like, hey, do you want to double check that? Do you want to see if that's as good as you want it? um when it's in a caring place, great, then that part of us can be helpful. Or if we're about to make a bad choice and walk down a street that's not good, and it's like, hey, you know what, is this really a smart idea to go down this street? That's helpful, right? We want the helpful part of the inner critic. We don't need the toxic shame, blame, and punishment part. All right. So that's my invitation to you. I really hope this was helpful. And because, like I said, I think all of us have it, and sometimes we're just not aware of it. So give yourself some time to start to notice how are you talking to yourself, and then do some work with it. And you can follow the information. I have some practices about shadowing your inner critic in my book, Fear Less: The Art of Using Anxiety to Your Advantage, published by Morgan James. And you can find it at your local bookstore or places online. So yeah, hope this was helpful. And I wish you well with it because I can tell you it'll be a life changer for you. And if you've started on this journey already, hey, keep going, girl. It's going to pay off in spades because this is one way we get to really embrace our inner freedom to decide what we're going to believe and what we're not going to believe anymore. All right. So remember, it's your turn. to find your voice, own your truth, and claim your power. I'll see you soon. And if you're liking what you're hearing, please go ahead and subscribe, leave us a review, share it with a friend if you think it would be helpful. All right, take it easy.